Hey guys, it's nerdnic, and this is the fifth part of my how to design foam board airplanes tutorial. In this part, I'm going to show you how to design your fuselage. So go ahead, jump over to your template file, and you're going to grab a couple pieces. One, you're going to grab the airfoil shape. You're going to grab this top section here for the fuselage. You're going to grab my power pod, and you're going to grab these three former bases. Go ahead and copy those and bring them over to your main file. And I want to do a little bit of explanation here on each of these pieces so we kind of know what we're getting into. One, I'm going to start with this center section, and really this is the backbone to the fuselage, right? This is the top plate, and the way that this works is this very front section here would be the front of the plane, and these from the black to the red line, this is like a flap where you would fold the paper over and close off this front edge. This piece may not be needed on your design, or it may not fit on the foam board. If you look at the length of your plane overall, right, you've got nose to tail, and this whole section has to fit on one sheet of foam in theory. And one sheet of foam, as you know, you guys already have set up as your artboard here, is about 76 centimeters. If you look at your fuselage, this one I think is too long. Yeah, I'm about 79. If you're under 76, then that means it'll fit on one sheet of foam. And if you're under like 70, then you can retain these flaps. And if you look at some of my previous designs, they have these flaps, and you can get an idea of what they, what the purpose is, what it looks like. Now, I just realized on this plane itself that the fuselage is too long for the foam, so we're gonna have to cut it in half somewhere, or have to scale down like the whole design. But I don't want to do that because we're pretty far into this, so I'm fine with just cutting in half. We'll do that a little bit later. But that's what this front section is for. My design will not have it, so I'll end up removing this piece here, and then this will be the front, and you'll see how that goes in a second. The next thing, this here is where the firewall is going to sit up against the top plate. So the depth between this section and this section is where the motor is going to sit. And this is designed to be for about a 30 can motor. So if you have like a 30-35, that's about what this is set for. Now this is all adjustable, so if you have a smaller motor or a bigger motor in mind, you would simply move the location of this line either forward or back based on the depth of your motor. If you adjust this, just keep in mind that if you're going to be using either the flight test power pod or my power pod, you must also move these lines or these dots as well, these holes right on both sides. These are where the skewers go to line up the power pod. So let's say you had a plane where you're like, the motor's way smaller, I could move it like this, move it forward, right? Or if the motor's way bigger, you could move it further in. They give you more depth here, and then you can shore up all these lines, right? You can drag these over, or you can clean that up. So do that based on the motor that you have. If you have like a 30, 35, or like a Power Pack C or whatever from Flight Test, you're going to be fine where it's at right now. This is the standard depth that I use on all of my designs. So if you've ever built one of those and it worked, you're good. Otherwise, adjust it. Next thing you have here is the knocker duct. This is basically for airflow. We're going to pop this out, and it'll help drive air down into the fuselage to cool the battery, ESC, and everything. This is optional. You don't need to have this. You can delete it if you'd like. The next thing we have here is the bottom plate for the hatch. And this will make more sense in a little bit, but this piece is needed, and it'll be adjusted and moved around based on your design. But that's what that's there for. These red slots here, these are if you're using the flight test power pod. If you are not using the flight test power pod, you can delete those. They're not needed. If you're using my pod or a different pod, you don't need them. But if you are designing around a swappable compatible, then these holes, these slots, the 4 slots, and then these 2 holes you have to have in your design. In these locations, you cannot move these at all, because these holes, these slots, and sorry to be specific, but I want to save you guys some time, and then this line are all specific to the flight test power pod. If you move any of these, move them together, like this is what I mean by that. Don't move just one or the other or whatever. If you move just one, then you're gonna have power pod won't fit. If you're not designing with the flight test power pod, then just do whatever you want. You don't have to worry about those too much. Next, what we have here is a slot. This is where one of the formers is going to go. For right now, you want to keep this because we'll use it later. This is where your servos sit on this design. These can be moved. I have them sitting basically covered right inside of the fuselage, just behind the wing usually is where these are sitting, but that's what they're there for. These are for 9 grams or 12 gram servos will fit in here. If you have bigger or smaller, you want to adjust these accordingly. And yeah, the next thing that I want to mention is this smaller slot here. If you notice, is addition, right? You have your foam channel here, which is where this 5mm foam folds up in, right? Just like this diagram is there. But this extra one, this is specific to my designs, and it's for a barbecue skewer. Basically, when you add the hatch in, right, you end up removing a big section of the fuselage, the backbone of the plane, and it makes it a little weaker. Right, adding the hatch is not in favor of strength, but it is in versatility and usability. But to try and counteract that, we add a skewer. So this line is here for that. If you don't want that, maybe you're trying to save on weight or whatever, you could get rid of those to do that, and now you're back to just a basic foam skeleton there. However, one thing you want to keep in mind as we move things around, this line is 30 centimeters, which is basically 12 inches, and that's the standard length of a barbecue skewer. So if you have shorter skewers like 10-inch or maybe longer ones, you could play with this and move it around. But as it is today, this is built around a 12-inch skewer. Same with the width, right? It's a standard, Walmart or whatever grocery store barbecue skewer that you buy, is the width of this channel is based on that. If you have some different skewers, or you're making a beefier plane, you want it to be stronger, and the skewer is really thick and massive, make those adjustments based on the measurements you need. But these are all, right now, this is all standard in terms of things you would commonly find in the US in these stores, these materials that we're using. So you should have success with those. Alright, cool. So that is what you're looking at here. And the other pieces, right, this is the nerdnic power pod. We will talk about this a little bit later, how it installs, but that's what this is. If you're not using it, right, again, if you're using the flight test, grab that one. If you're using mine, grab this one. This is the airfoil cutout for the fuselage. We'll be playing with this here shortly. And then these three guys, these are the formers, right? This first one with this big overlap on the bottom, that one goes here, and that's usually what I call like former A on my plans. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. This is former A with the 2 slots. It goes here, and you'll see how that installs in a little bit. That's former A. This is former B, which is the back on this side over here. So A and then B, and then this is C usually. So my planes that have about a 40-inch wingspan, or even down to the 30 inches, I use 3 formers for the most part. Sometimes 4 if it's needed, but 3 is the minimum that you'll need for most designs. And that last one, which is C, right, sits back here. And all those will make more sense as we get into it. But with these pieces, we're going to go ahead and get started. So jump over to your fuselage and go ahead and hide if you have the vertical or horizontal stabilizer visible. You don't need those right now, right? We just want the fuselage piece that you started with, and we're going to go ahead and make some decisions right now on how to move forward. Okay, so decision 1, you need to decide how long, how wide this guy is going to be your cutout. Okay, and actually no, let's take one step back. There's one other decision you have to make before you put anything on this, right? So you're starting here. The decision you need to make is around your pod, right? Are you using my pod or your own pod or the flight test pod? What are you doing with the pod? Now, I've designed my pod specifically to be deeper and shorter, so it's easier to manage, right? You don't have to. It doesn't go all the way back into your fuselage, and it's deeper, meaning you can actually put a battery inside of it, right? Once the pod's installed, like a 2200 3-cell will fit inside, which is great. So I've also added a little bit of right thrust to it because I like to run powerful motors, and that helps. But there's something about this pod that you have to know, or about any pod that you're looking at. If I look at the nose on my fuselage, so if I zoom in here to the picture and everything, if you remember, we put this line's location based on how much former height I would have to do my curving and everything. Now, if you bring this line up too high, then you end up losing the ability to have a nice curved deck on top, right? It ends up being like flat nose, or you can see the edge. And visually, I think that looks really bad, so I try to avoid that. So I favor having a lower top deck so my formers can have more curve to them. Make sense? Now the problem with that is you end up running into clearance issues, right? So when this pod's installed, it actually doesn't sit, and I'll close this just to see it. It doesn't sit up top here because the top plate, which we were just looking at, actually sits down a little bit. So you lose about 0.5 depth because there's a piece of foam here, and there's also a piece of foam on the bottom plate, right? You lose about 0.5 there. So the clearance you have for a pod to slide in is minus basically 1 centimeter from whatever you have here, right? You end up with that. Now the problem is the way these pods are designed. If you look at this little image here, the sidewall fits on top of the bottom plate, which means you have from here, the top, all the way down to the second red line for clearance that has to be able to fit in, right? That's how much height the pod's going to have. So if I bring that up over here, if you notice, it's not going to fit. It's actually significantly too tall. It's a problem. So I have to figure out how to adjust this. Either I adjust the pod, which is totally easy, right? All I'd have to do is basically subtract the amount of clearance off of both sides, and then you have a fitting pod, right? Let's say that was what I was going to do. That's how I would solve that issue. I need, again, from the cut line all the way to the second red line to fit within that space. It does now. That means this pod could slide directly in. But now I'm left with a small pod that I can't really fit the battery into, but I have a lot of space underneath. Maybe the battery could sit lower, down here. So there's some options, right? You can play with it. But if I needed the battery all the way up to the nose for CG, I'd be in trouble with a more narrow pod. So you got to make a call here. There's two things you can do, right? You can adjust your pod, or you could drop the pod. I mean, whatever you could do. You could do whatever you want there. Or you can adjust, again, the top plate, right? If you needed to, this could go higher, right? We haven't made any decisions yet that would prevent this from happening, other than how much curve do we want. And what I'm going to show you right now is how to determine, do I have enough curve left, right? Is my turtle deck going to be smashed or not? And if you remember when I had you pick out your 3-view in the very first video, I said, hey, pick one that has these cross sections. These are really helpful. And here's why. We now have the exact shape of section A, which is right here. Section, I don't know what letter that is in Russian or whatever this is, but that's right here. And then it looks like a B, right? Right here. And then this AA, which is right here. And then your E, which is here, right? You have these cross sections. So we know if we put the formers on those locations, hey, we have the shape. It's pretty nice. The center on this plane is like basically round, which isn't helpful really for a Dollar Tree plane because you can't do that very easily. Or at least I'm not going to show you how to do that right now because I don't know how to do it very well yet. But we have one here, the second one, right, which is a good spot just to verify. You can check on the height here to see how much space do you have, or how much height do you have before the curve ends, right? So if you looked at this, it kind of goes like straight. You have like a straight section, and then it goes into the curve, right? So if you imagine, right, the sidewall of the airplane, which is here, on the straight section wouldn't look so bad, right? If this was, where your sidewall ended up being, and you had this curve that came up, you could have a pretty good former. It would look nice. The problem is if this piece, this line here, actually ends up having to extend up further, right? Now you have to add a curve on a very small amount of slope or distance, and you end up with this weird, like, that's how your form is going to look, right? It's going to look really, that corner's going to look hideous all down the whole side of the airplane is going to have that curve. So what you want to figure out is how much space do I have here? What's my distance before the curve ends, right? And if I look at this section here, what I'm probably going to do on this plane is make this nose former or whatever like this shape. I'm not going to make it circular, right? I'm going to probably stick to something like this. So if I look at my height here, I've got about from here up to about there. I've got about 2.28 centimeters of height. Now the question is, where's 2.28? Right about there, actually. So that means I can bring my line from where it was here, roughly, or no, sorry, it was here, all the way up to here. So just to back up for a second, if I turn off this guy that gets in our way of seeing, this long line here, this top line, used to be right about here, and now it's way up here. Because I have enough, right? There's still enough. That's how tall my former is going to be, and that's how much curve I had. So that's cool. Now if I bring this guy in, do you think it fits? Hey, it's a lot closer now. if I look at that, right? This is my new whatever 5mm line or whatever it is. Like, it's pretty close. Like, I like that actually, because one thing you can do with the PowerPod when you install it is you can actually, if I can visually show this here, you can actually kind of tip it in. When you put it in, you can kind of tip it in like this. Whoosh, you slide it in, and then once it gets like that far, you can go ahead and slide it back or whatever. As you put it in, you can slide it into a flat space or whatever. That's how I think my P39 does that. So this is actually pretty close, even though it's technically not going to fit, right? When you account for the thickness of the foam on top and bottom, it looks like it's pretty close. So I'm going to go with that. I kind of like that. You play with it, right? It's not you're not sealed by any means. You can adjust the pod. You can make things work. You can make it happen. So I'm going to go with that. Delete all those crap lines, and we're back to here. So now we have a fuselage that's a little bit higher than I originally thought, but I feel good about it, right? I feel like we still have enough clearance to get some nice curve and everything. Okay, so now that we've made that decision, we can go ahead and add in the wing section, right, the cutout. So let's go ahead and grab this guy. And what you're going to do here is you're going to go over to your wing, and we're going to figure out where this cutout is going to sit on the wing. Now, it's not going to sit at root because the fuselage has width, right? It's actually going to sit in. So if you were to measure the width of this section, you're too long, right? It actually sits in a little bit, but how much, right? Let me show you how to figure that out. This over here, this backbone section of the plane, the fuselage, is your width measurement. So if I go from this line, this red line, or the black, whatever top line here, to the center of this piece, which is there. Actually, hold on. Let me do it on this side so I can get the boom right there. There's my center piece. Okay, that is half of the width of the entire fuselage, right? The outside of the foam to the outside of the foam is 3.17 centimeters. That tells me over here, if I draw a line, 3.17 centimeters, 3.1. This is the hardest part of this whole thing, guys. 19, let's go with that. And do two of them. Right, pick two spots. 3.17. Alright, cool. I feel good about that. I can now draw a line between them and then extend it out. So now I've got the right distance between both, and I'm going to bring this one up to the bevel line. I'm not going to bring it all the way to the center, because when you fold the foam over, you lose some of the width, right? The foam gets smashed and compressed, and it ends up being about here, or if here is relative because your plane's a different size, I think it's about 0.5-ish. I mean, it's kind of a give or take based on the height of your airfoil and everything. If you're using my design, go off the bevel, or 0.5 is a good place to start. This one's 0.7. If you do 0.5, it just might be a little bit of a tight fit when you squeeze the wing in. You can adjust it. It's no big deal. You'll be close enough on your first build that you feel good about it. Okay, so this line now is the length, 25.88, of how wide this needs to be. Now right now it is not that big. This is smaller, so I need to adjust it. It's just 22, and again, measure twice, cut once, right? We want to do 25.88. So if I draw a line that is 25.88, 25.7, I can't see, 25.85, that's good enough. If I grab this piece now, put it at the front, right? So the front's lined up. I don't want to scale this. I want to stretch it, right? Don't scale it up, because that makes it thicker, right? You don't want to make it thicker because your wing doesn't. It's not. Don't do it. This is already set for the proper wing thickness based on my wing. I guess I should note, if you're using another wing design, you're gonna have to play with this, and I would probably just start over. I wouldn't even take mine. I would draw your own and do it that way. Because this is not going to be the same as if you change like the thickness of your spar, or if you're using different template, or I don't know, whatever, your wing's different, don't use this. This is only if you're using either the basic or speed wing that I've showed you how to design. Anyway, grab this, don't scale it, stretch it to the width of your piece. Okay, so now you have something that's the proper thickness, but now it's adjusted for the width of your airfoil cord, right? Okay, you've got that now. Now, if we bring this guy over here, this should be almost exactly the right size. So I'm going to bring this over, and I want those two lines to touch. That's the critical part. So I'm going to zoom in real far so I can get those anchored. And boom. Okay, so those are good now. If I zoom out, it's really close. Like I said, this is actually perfect. If you had a plane where this ended up being like some crazy amount of distance different or whatever, like you're in a little bit more trouble, because that means you have to make an adjustment to the plane that's going to move it away from scale, but it's not the end of the world. The one thing about this this airfoil cutout that I want to mention is it is specifically designed when you talk about a neutral thrust angle and you talk about a neutral horizontal stabilizer surface, which these both have. Now I'm totally blanking on all my fancy airplane terms. The angle of attack on this is specifically designed with the neutral points in mind so that you have the right flight characteristics. What you'll be tempted to do is you say, oh, that line's off a little bit. Let me just rotate this a little bit, Nick. Oh, good, now it fits. We're good. Don't do that. If you do that, I don't know how your plane's going to fly, but it probably won't be good, because especially if you introduce a large amount of negative. All right, this is the same. This is the same as deflecting, right? You're basically adding in a bunch of trim and not in the way you want, right? If you were to move it the other way, it would be better because it would make you like rise more. You're making the angle of attack more positive, and you'd like the plane would climb, and so at least it wouldn't pummel drive into the ground if you add too much down degrees. So yeah, so don't play with this because it's and when I say specifically designed, it's specific to my wing and the airfoil shape. The reason this is, and it's actually a small amount of negative, if you were to measure it, is because when you accelerate, most wings, most flat bottom surfaces or flat bottom airplane airfoils will make you rise. You'll gain altitude as you go faster, and I don't like that because then you have to introduce a lot of trim and it makes it just a weird plane and you're adding a lot of drag. So these have a small amount of negative angle of attack so that as you accelerate, it keeps it again based on the neutral horizontal and the neutral thrust angle. It does a really good job at keeping you level flight even at high speed. So at a very large speed envelope, so either from like 15 miles an hour to 120 miles an hour, it doesn't balloon. It doesn't climb when you accelerate. So that's why this is there, or specific to this. So I explained a lot of that because this is important. This is one of the critical pieces of your airplane when you're designing your own plane. If you get this wrong, if your angle of attack is wrong, the plane will fly really bad and you may not know why, or you don't understand what's happening, right, or how to fix it. So this is critical that you have correct. In a normal like flight test plane or whatever, when you have a flat bottom wing and then you've got a very whatever, one of their airfoils that's like this, right? It's whatever. Probably don't need to spend this much time drawing it, but theirs is like this, right? It's their wing is kind of like this, right? And this, if your wing looks like this, right, if you don't have airfoil on the bottom or whatever, then you'd want to design it so that this is flat, right? The bottom of the wing is also neutral, just like your thrust angle is neutral, just like your horizontal is neutral. So you'd put it like here, boop, like that. There's your cutout, right? And then you'd make your changes or whatever. This is probably the wing, more common wing design, right? That you'll see on these foamy airplanes. Anyway, all right, so let's move on to this next part. So this lines up pretty good, which is great. Hopefully it does on your plane. If it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. But here's what you got to decide. Right now, we've drawn the outline of this fuselage to be as scale as we can, right? It follows the curve of the airplane as best as we can. And these are both straight lines, mind you, right now. If you wanted to make this a curved line to be super scale, be my guest, do it. It looks great. The problem is, and to show this, I'm going to bring this guy over. I want this one. This is the belly tail piece, by the way. You can bring that over. This guy, in theory, sits right here against the the edge of the bottom. and then it extends to wherever the wing is. This is a rigid flat piece of foam. If you have a curve, right, not a kink like I do, which I'll talk about that, but if you have a curve, right, if your bottom of your plane goes like this, to make this piece of foam do that, you got to remove the paper on the inside, so it'll bend, which is great. It looks nice, but it's not nearly as strong. And this section of the plane is really critical in being strong, because the horizontal and vertical stabilizer are all out there by themselves. And if you don't have a really rigid base here, these will wobble and flip around and stuff, and you're going to have a weaker plane, especially if you crash a little bit. It's very common that you nose dive in and you get like a crinkle over here, or a crinkle right here if you've ever seen that. Even though your tail never hits the ground, because it's not rigid, the impact causes a crinkle or whatever, or an impact, not an impact, but like a crumple zone happens like right here. And if this bottom piece, if you remove that paper, you make it even weaker. So I do not usually do a curved piece for that reason. I want this to be strong and rigid. But there is a kink, right? So same concept. This piece, this is a rigid flat piece of foam. There is a straight line, kink, straight line, straight line. That means I have to introduce right here a 50% line, so that when you build this piece, you crease this so that it bends, right? So you add that small degree of bend into it. That's totally fine. It does make it, I guess, technically a little bit weaker, but not by a whole lot. You still have that lateral strength, right? Because the paper still is there across the rest of the pieces, so you don't lose much, but you keep it more scale. So you got to kind of make a decision. Do you want it to be scale, or do you not care? For ease, if you want this to be simple, the faster build, faster design, get rid of this line completely and just drag this sucker up, right? Now you've got a totally functional works, but you're not scale anymore, right? It's not going to capture those same lines. Yeah, so you have to make that decision. Now, I am here now. This is not perfect. It's okay. I'm going to grab this and just connect it. What I've done is I've lost a small amount of fidelity there, right? A small amount of the scale line, but not really that much. And honestly, because we're going to put the scoop on here, I don't care. You can't even tell. In fact, I could have drawn that and thought, hey, that's the line it takes anyway, right? You'll never know because it's going to be hidden by the scoop. So I'm going to do that because it works for me, right? It works for this plane, but you have to make that call on your design. And yeah, that's that one. Cool. So now we're getting really close, guys, to patching this fuselage all together. This next piece here is going to make this go real fast. What we're going to do is we're going to grab this big guy, and the way this sits, and we'll move the fuselage out of the way. We don't care about you. This line was for measuring. You're gone. All right. The way that this works, your top line that I had you guys find is this line here that extends all the way back. Boom, boom, boom. Right? It starts as black, turns into red. It's that line. So when I put this piece over here, that's how we're going to line it up. I'm going to zoom way in so I can get this nice and tight. I'm going to go ahead and delete this line now because I don't care about it. And this section right here, this intersection, this joint is going to be this joint now. It's going to join right there, right? So I'm going to move this to there. And there it is. It's now connected. So the skewer sits inside the side plate as it does here. This is the very top of the side plate. You then have your foam channel, which is technically part of the top plate, and that all looks good. My design, like I said, will not use this flap, which folds over, protects the front. Actually, you know what? I take that back. Because we're going to cut the fuselage, because it's too long, I'm going to keep it. I really like this flap because it helps, one, make the nose more rigid since you're like doubling over the paper. You're adding glue, and it helps the paper from peeling away on the nose. If you ever had a plane where the front of the fuselage, right, this is the very front plate, the paper starts to peel off or whatever because you nose dive in, this helps prevent that, and it makes it look a lot cleaner. So what I'm going to do then is I'm also going to delete this black line that we had already drawn. I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to extend now this red line down to here because that's now a bevel line. I'm sorry, a 50% score cut line. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to extend it down to there. Boom. And I'm going to add on this guy. There you go. Now you have a closed, this is how the nose is, you know, when you cut this out, this is flat foam, 50% cut there, peel this paper and foam off, fold the paper over and glue it down. And you've got a sealed front This line or this front edge is now sealed, and you've got a little reinforced because you added some glue here to make this nose just a little bit stronger, which is great, right? Really helps durability. All right, so now that we have that, we're going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to make a decision about a couple things, right? This is again, your design is going to be or whatever you do here is specific to your design. Now, the reality is the location of the hatch, the location of these formers, which is decided by the hatch, the front. Remember, A is here, B is here, C is here for your formers. These are decided not by my template, but by your design. And so you have to move these. So if I pull my picture back, we'll start at the front. There's going to be a former sitting, right here. And this former is sorry, I said a brain fart there. This former is what helps the basically the foam board. I'm sorry, the foam board. The poster board be supported from this section down all the way to the nose. So the distance here, you have to make a decision about how much. And then how much curve do you actually want, right? So for example, on this design, if I were to break this into a really crude geometry, I would say like this is basically a straight line to here on this curve, right, of the, if you guys see that, right, the curve of the top decking. And then there's kind of a straight line here, right? You could, if you want to get more scale, you can add like another bump, right? So you could do it like that. If you did that, you would need to have another former like here, right? You'd have to add another former here, which is totally fine, and maybe a former here. Actually, no, this former I would say should be this A right here. The one I have is A. So make a decision about how you want that curve to go. I think this actually looks pretty nice, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a former here at the front, and then I'm going to move this guy to be here. This is where my second former will go, right here. So to do that, I'm going to select just this front part, right? I'm not going to select this whole thing. I'm going to select the two inside red lines and then these pieces here, right? All at once. And now I can use my keyboard arrows to move this up. If I move this up, I'm now moving the placement of the hatch and the placement of this former. And now it looks a lot, this is a lot better. But before I do that, I'm going to move this guy too out of the way, because I want to keep him. I like airflow. This is a little bit small amount of space here, right, between this edge of foam and this edge of foam. So I'm actually going to shrink the size of this thing. The shape of this and everything, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. You just want something that's going to grab the air and force it in, right? Cool. So I can now finish this one off. Move this forward to right about there. Okay. So now I have the former location, which again, if I look at this, this is about where that curve drops down, right? So now I've got that. The second thing I want to do is go over here and see where this one's going to go. So there's going to be a former sitting right here, which it technically occupies the space like this, right? This is where it sits. It sits like that, okay? It doesn't sit over the hatch piece. So basically you want, this one usually ends right around where the canopy starts. So it's got to move forward just a little bit. It's real close though, right? I would move this to be right about there. That way that former sits right here, right? And that's where, yeah, that's a good spot. And actually, yeah, no, I like that. I like that spot a lot. So we've got former here, former here. I'll probably add another former, like I said, at the nose, just to get that a little bit more rounded, so it's not just a straight shot or whatever. But that's good. And so let me go back over here. I don't need these lines anymore. Those aren't needed for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and move. So you'll do the same thing, right, on your design. You're going to move this stuff. And one thing to note, some designs, the hatch will fit underneath the canopy. Other designs, it fits across the nose, like you see here. This is, you know, whatever. This time, it just works out this way. It just depends on the canopy placement. I think, like my P39, the hatch is the canopy, since the canopy is more central on the plane. The one thing I would say, how do you make that decision, right? Let's say you could do either. It's not clear. How do you make that call? Well, what you need to keep in mind is, what's the point of the battery hatch? The point is so you can open up the thing and put the freaking battery in. And to do that, you need to keep in mind where the CG is going to be, because the location of the battery hatch needs to be central to where the CG is going to be, so that if you put that battery in, you can reach up further towards the nose or further towards the tail. Now, you can guess and say, yeah, this looks good, I'm great, but then maybe you build the plane and you realize the battery has to sit like back here for CG, or I don't know, something crazy. Then you maybe need to adjust the battery hatch location. Maybe you don't do it in front of the nose. Maybe you do it as this or whatever, right? Maybe you have to make a call, right? I would say up front, put it a little bit forward of the CG, since most of the planes you're going to design need the battery to sit towards the nose to balance, just based on this size and my experience. Most of the batteries are going to sit up here, so favor in front of the CG, but that's something that you might have to adjust once you build the plane. So make that call now, and then just realize you might have to play with it later. Another thing to keep in mind is the size of the hatch, right? If it's too small, it's not usable, you can't get your hand in there, you can't get the battery in there, do a measurement. Look at your battery that you're going to be using. I would say the length of it, let's say your battery's like a 2200 and it's like this big, the length of your battery hatch should be at least 2/3, I would say, of the battery size. If it's half or less, you're going to have a hard time getting your fingers in there and getting everything situated. You won't be able to move it very far in either direction because you just don't have the space. So at least 2/3 the size of your battery is excuse me, the length that you need to go for. If it's too long, you're going to run into strength issues. Even though you have these nifty barbecue skewers, you're going to run into strength problems. So the length, I can't give you a rule of thumb there because I haven't had that problem yet. But if it's too big, you'll be weak. So just keep that in mind. Now, going back over here, the last thing we need to move around is the back side. Now, on most like warboard type planes, the point at which you taper, right? Everything on the top plate up to this point has been straight, and now we have an introduced curve. This is where, excuse me guys, I got something in my throat. All right, this is where the fuselage starts to taper, and what you want to look at on your plane, right, whatever you're referencing, look at the 3 view and just take a look. Where does it stop being basically a big canoe, and where does it start tapering? Most planes, right, most designs, it's about where the wing's at, right? Once you pass the wing, it starts to taper down to the stabilizers. And I think unless your plane is drastically different, it's probably a good place to do it. So I'm going to do that on mine. I don't try to capture the scale lines of the fuselage width, because it's very difficult to account for a pod if you have a curved section here like this one does on the sides, or if you have a curved back. You can, right? But then you have to remove paper because it's got a bend. You have a pod that doesn't sit securely. It introduces a lot of other challenges that you can work around, but it makes it much more complex to design and much more complex to build, and it's not as strong. So anyway, I usually go kind of the hot dog design, and then I just taper it down. So for me on this yak, about the end of the wing is when it starts to taper. So if I go back to my fuselage and I zoom in here, the end of the wing is where I want to bring this joint right here. Okay, so I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to stretch it. Just these, nothing else is moving, right? Just these pieces. And I'm going to bring it, again, this joint to right about the edge of the wing, at the trailing edge there. And yep, looks good to me. Right about there, just a spot check. Yeah, that's good. Now, if I look at my picture again, what I want to do now is this guy needs to sit at the end of my canopy, because there's going to be a former right here, and you don't want to see that inside of your canopy, right? So I'm going to move this all by itself, boop, 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 just behind it, like that. And that's where that form is going to sit, so that the poster board and everything can tidy up right there and not be in the way. So the canopy will be nice. This is a clear cavity. Won't see anything. It's going to look real cool. Now, so for my plane, I have a top plate that ends up looking like that, and it works out pretty good. The last thing we have to tidy up is this line. So from here, you have to draw a line that connected up the fuselage. And now you have one side of your top plate. The only thing you have to add now to this one still is your notch for your horizontal stabilizer. And we'll get back to that in another video in terms of how do you do all that with your stabilizers. But looking at this is the section right where the horizontal stabilizer is going to sit. Excuse me guys, I'm so sorry. And you need to add a 0.7 height tab here. Once you've got it added, you can then move this around and stretch it and everything, whatever you want to do with it. It's not that big of a deal right now. But get that on there, and I would say even go one step further, clean it up so it looks good. We can play with that later based on the placement of other stuff on the horizontal stabilizer. But for now, let's just put that tab in and get it going. So we now have one side. You've got your power pod holes, you've got your wing cutout, you've got your tab, you've got your center plate, and you've got the adjusted center section. Now, the next thing you need to do is basically make a copy of all the lines that I just selected, right? You can leave these center sections off, they're not needed. You just need to copy these ones, and actually you don't need these holes. You copy these lines, paste it, flip it around, transform, reflect. Once I flip this guy around, now I simply line it up, and you should zoom in and make this really, real crisp as possible. Make it as crisp as possible, because if you don't, whatever, yeah, you make that nice and lined up. But you now have your fuselage. The only thing I have to add to mine, because again, it's too long, right? It needs to be under 76, 79. I have to decide where the heck am I going to cut this thing off so that I have two pieces that, can be built separately, because the foam's only so big. One thing I will say is, from a distance perspective, I'm sorry, that was the wrong way to say that sentence. From a strength perspective, don't put your cut here if you can avoid it, and don't put your cut underneath where the horizontal stabilizer is. This is foam to foam connection, and you can add some extra reinforcements inside, which if you're planning on a longer fuselage, which this one is pretty long, you might need to add another former back here midsection. I don't like the Flight Test Spitfire has one there or whatever. I probably will add one. What I would say to do is decide where you want that former to go. Usually wherever this one is, and wherever it's your poster board is gonna touch your vertical stabilizer, cut that distance in half. So right about here, that's where my the other former is gonna go. I can make that decision, based on that. And now, if I do this, if I draw my cut line here, right? This is how I'm breaking my fuselage into two pieces. What I can do is then put the former here, right? When I build this other former that's going to go here, it will be glued to the sidewall like this on both side walls, so it adds some extra reinforcement there to make this a little bit stronger. So now I have a joint, just has more surface area, right, with glue on and everything. Try and do that if you can. If you're gonna, go ahead and cut this guy in half. I hate doing this. I really should have had you guys in the beginning make those measurements, like I talked about in the wing video. If you're bigger than your foam, it just causes some headaches. So try to avoid that, guys. If you can, make things a little bit smaller. So it all fits. Everything is nice and fits. Use your piece of foam and do that. If you started with the plane that big, it would have made this a lot easier, because everything is to scale now. All these things are like, you can't just make them smaller. All these channels, all these pieces, you can't just play with it. So try and do that in the beginning. Alright, next thing I want to show you guys real quick is how do you determine these guys, right? So we said this is A. Oops. This is our former A, which is going to sit basically here, and then B sits over here, and then C sits over here. How the heck do we figure this out? This part's pretty easy. I'm going to show you how to do one, and then you can do the rest on your own. Alright, so what we need, right, again, the cross sections come in handy. I'm going to do this over, let's do on number C, for example, or letter C, for example. This former is going to sit like this. Okay, it's going to sit embedded down past the side plate, right? It's going to sit in the top plate, which sits embedded on the side plate. Again, look at the reference picture here, right? So that's where this is going to sit. That means we need to have a former that goes to this height or whatever, right? And now how do we decide that? So if I look at this picture from this section of the middle, right, of where the former is going to be, down to the bottom of how tall it has to be, I'm at 3.85 centimeters. If I go up here, this was called A. If I go to the A former over here, I need 3.5 centimeters, right? That's what it was. I'm so bad at remembering these stuff. 3.85. 3.85. So if I draw a line, 3.85, 8.5. There it is. That's how big I gotta make this freaking former, right? So I go over here. I can start right on the top if I want. Come to here. Let's see if I can do one swoop. I think I can. Is that pretty enough? Can I do it? Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah. There it is. There is my. There's my curve. I'm gonna copy this, flip it around. Oops. Transform, reflect. Flip her around. I now have this former. If I go over here now, it's almost always going to be too thick, meaning too wide. Sure enough, it's way too wide if you see that. So I connected this edge. Oops. Connected this edge here. And as I said, right, it's way too wide. So I have to now not scale it. I have to shrink it down to that width. Now it's here connected, here connected. And the height is good. I now have former C. There is former C. Boom, done. Do the same thing for B and A. The only difference is this piece, right, has a little different geometry to it, but don't worry about the bottom part, right? The width from here to here is the same, and the way you draw the curve and connect is the same, right? It's all the same. Man, I'm sorry guys, I am just all over the place today. This is not just former B. Yeah, this. Sorry guys, let me start over on the naming of these things. Good thing you guys haven't built the plane yet, right? This is not former A. This is former A and C. This one actually goes on the front. You think I haven't even built my own plane before that I designed. It's been a while, guys. This is former A. See how it has the hole in it? This is for airflow to come through the former into the NACA down into the fuselage. So this overlaps. It sits like this, right? And it overlaps the front where the firewall connection is to prevent the paper from delaminating. This same former base here is what you will put on former C, right? So A, B, this one sits here and it overlaps. These long pieces here are for the so the hatch doesn't delaminate this paper here. And actually, I need to make an adjustment there. These need to be. Sorry guys, I'll fix this in the template. These need to be like this, so they don't get in the way. Right? They're like that. Anyway, this is B. This is also C. You can lose this hole here because you don't need more airflow on that side. And then this one again, for paper delamination purposes, will overlap here. Flip that over. Okay, I'm so sorry that I messed up the names of those. So this would be A, B, C, and then this would be D former. Cool. Thank you for forgiving me, guys. Now that you have those, once those are designed, you have the base formers for your fuselage. The only thing I haven't showed you yet, which I will quickly illustrate, is you need to take this piece. This is your actual hatch. and this part's really easy now that you know how to design these formers, is this guy. And let me get these out of the way just so you can see. You have former B and C here, right, which will be built out and have their, their curve on them. And then you've got this guy, this hatch. This hatch piece sits on top of the hatch area. So what I need to do is make this bigger. So the way this sits is this first red line here is what lines up on this line here. So it sits like this, and you have to then stretch this red line all the way to here. Okay, and so to do that, I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit so I can grab them. I'm going to grab that and grab that, and now I move this up until this full red line is lined up with the hatch. So you'll stretch that, bam, now you have the top hatch, right? This is the actual plate, and what you have to do is just take the former that you put here, and just to show you guys, like let's say this was here, right? This is your B former. This is your B former. You would basically just take this, copy it off, and you're gonna put it on here. And the only tricky thing here is that you have to put this. The base of this has to go at the base of this joint. It doesn't go up here, because when you actually build this the hatch, this actually folds up on top, and so you have to remove the height from the former out of the width of the foam. So it sits like this. I know you'll be tempted to put this piece up here, but it doesn't go there. It goes there. So now you have one half. Do the same thing, right? Take the top of this one, put it there, and boom, you have your hatch. If these are like really different shaped, like whatever, here's your whatever one, and then the other one over here is like bigger or whatever, then you don't have to label them. But if they're the same or similar, you might have to indicate which is the front or back or whatever on your plans, just so you have all that figured out. But that's how you build the hatch plate. I'm not going to show you guys again because you already know how to do that. Just go ahead and get it done, and you're good to go there. So what that leaves you with now is a completed fuselage. You've got your hatch, you've got your formers, and everything is set up to be scale and ready to go. Now the fuselage is done for the most part. There's a few other things you might have to add, which we'll talk about in a later video, but you're good with the fuselage. What you need to add now is the cutouts to your wing, right? We determined how wide the airfoil cutout is based on the wing. Now we need to put the cutout, these notches in the wing itself. And to do that, we need the width of this notch, which is 312, and you need it to be about 0.45 or 0.7 of width, right? So now I have this little piece, and what I need to do is measure where from the trailing edge does it start. Where's the cutout? 751. If I come over here now, if I go 751, 7, 5. The more you zoom in, guys, the more fine you can get with your measurements. Let me zoom in here. 751, 751, right there. That's the start of this guy. So I'm going to bring it over. We're going to go ahead and rotate it onto this angle because that's the angle that we need. So boom, boom, and now it's a little bit off. Swing this up. Okay, that's the angle there. And where's that joint? It's a little bit further down. Where's that? Right there. So now if I move this into place, it's basically right on, right? Close as you can there. Now, there's one. Copy this, right? Now you have the right angle, and we're going to measure the second one now. The second one, we don't need this line again. The second one from the trailing edge starts about 2186. And so if I do that, 2186, 2184, that's pretty close. We can go ahead and paste in this guy here, which Boo. Yeah, right about there. Move back just a little bit. These ones you want to be as close as you can. This doesn't have to be perfect, but pretty close, right? Now, what you're left with is, hopefully, once you get rid of this stuff now, all these extra lines that we made, you should be left with the cutout locations on the top wing, not the bottom wing, top wing, of where the notches go. Should be pretty close to what you need. The reason we didn't measure from the leading edge is because, again, this foam compresses, and based on your wing size, the compression varies, and there's no consistent, and yada yada. We talked about that. If you measure from here, your slots will be off. Measure from the trailing edge, you'll be closer. What will happen most likely, where you'll have an issue, is if this measurement was wrong, if you didn't add enough gap or whatever, if your measurement was off, then when you put the wing in, there might be an air gap here, or the opposite. The wing might extend further, and you have to make an adjustment then, right? There's two things you can do. If the wing is the right width, it just sits too far up, then maybe you have to move these guys back. Or you maybe have to adjust this hole. Maybe the wing just came out bigger, so you got to actually come over here and adjust this to be a little bit wider, or whatever it is, right? You make that call once you build the wing. But again, what I'm showing you right now, when you build this thing, it's going to fit crisp. Like you're going to be amazed at how well this goes together for a first build, because I've done the measurements, I've done this a lot of times, and hopefully I'm giving you the foundation so that you'll have success, right? That first time when you go and do it. And you can make those little tweaks as you need to. But that's that. So the wing is now good. The last thing you have to do is our little tail and nose belly. So go back to your template, and you have this guy as well. There's those cute little guy. So paste him in. He's going to go up here, and paste this guy in, and he goes over here. Oh, one thing to note, I have two tail bellies, this one and this one. The difference here is this first one has a thicker back end, and this one has a thinner. Which one do you pick is based on how you're going to do your stabilizers. If you're going to do your stabilizers like I do, where they're 2 layers thick of foam, then you want this bigger one. If you're doing the flight test style, where it's just 1 layer thick for the horizontal and the vertical, then pick this one. No other difference other than how it comes together at the end for the width there. I'm doing double layer, so I'm picking this one and this one. Okay, I have this designed so that if your plane doesn't just do a straight taper the whole way back from behind the wing, some planes are like they're hot dog for longer before they curve, then you might have to have this flat piece here. If your plane does a straight curve back like this one does, you can delete these two, because it's going to hit the wing basically straight up like this, right? It's going to butt up the wing again like that. Now, the way that this works is you need to measure how long this is, both of these, so that you know how long to make your back piece, right? Pretty straightforward. This one, I'm really bad at math, is 12, 8, 9. So we're going to do 12.89 plus whatever the length of this next one is. Oh, what happened there? 12.89 plus 24.8. 24.8. That tells me I need a line that's 37.69. So if I draw this out now, here, 37.6. Actually, now that I made it, I can go over here and adjust it. 37.69. Bam. Alright, this line is now 37.69. I can take this piece, put it right up to the edge, grab it. Now again, I'm not going to scale it. I'm not scaling it. I'm going to stretch it. So I'm just going to stretch it. Boom. That piece is now, the channels is still the right width. The length is good. We are good. That piece now fits there. The only thing I have to make an adjustment for is, now that this sits here, how far back is this curve here, right? That's the call we want to make. I don't need that line anymore, I don't need that line anymore. So if I measure this from the edge of the wing to there, 24.8. That's how far back I need to add my 24.8. Alright, right here. This is where there's going to be a 50% cut, which I will make red, because that's where you, come on, color. Boom. That's that now. That way remember this is flat rigid, it can bend up there. Alright, that one's good for length. And now we want to do the nose. Same thing, we need to know how long is this so we can make this this piece that long. Now, there's some special way that you can measure a length of a line in Illustrator. I don't know how to do it, so I do it the ghetto way. Basically count. In this case, I'll do like 2 centimeters because these are pretty straight. If you look at that, right, it's pretty much right on. I'll count how many. I'll do 2 centimeters, and then I'll count how many I had to do. Come on. It's riveting, I know. I'm going to make you watch the whole thing too. I'm not going to fast forward it. Boop, 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 2 centimeters. I don't know if you guys realize this, but these are all recorded in essentially one take. If I make a really big mistake, I will go back and I will re-record it, which I've done a couple times, not on this video yet, but on the previous ones. You know what? I want this to be organic, and I like to talk a lot, so it works out. Hope you guys don't mind too much. Alright, so I am 2s and then a 1.23. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 8, excuse me, 8 times 2 is 16 plus 1.3, so 17.23. I guess what it is. Yeah, 23, yeah. 17.23. So that's my length from here to here. 17.23. Oh, it's so close. 17.23. Move that. There it is. See, I could have done the fancy measurement where it told me what it was, but that would have been, it probably would have taken me longer. Maybe not. I should probably learn how to do that. If I learn, I'll tell you guys. I'll teach you. It's supposed to be some way where you can just like click a line in Illustrator and it'll like tell you how long it is. It's like magic. Okay. Come on. Did I get it? I got it. I think so. Alright. Now that's long enough. We're good there. The only thing that you have to account for now is the cutout. Like the wing is not a straight wing. If you have a wing that has, it's just a big square or something like a cub, then you're fine. This is not, right? This wing has taper. The leading edge is angled back. And so the front and the trailing edge has to be adjusted. The way I do that is I figure out what is the curve. So when I say curve, I meant angle, of course. What is the angle of these two pieces? So now if I grab them, boom, boom, boom. Oops, I thought I grabbed both of them. Come on. Yeah, there we go. What is the angle of this piece? This is the leading edge. So if I make this line straight here, I need that one to be straight because that is the piece that tells us the angle. So I straighten that out. And of course I did not do a good job. Alright, so now I have, if I rotate this like that and put this in the center of this, not that side, that's the nose, this side. If I make that straight, put it in the center of this, and move this back This is backwards. This is the wing. Reflect this way. If I rotate this, put it in the center. Alright, now here, right there. So I care about this joint, and then this is in the center. This, if you imagine, is the wing, the angle of the wing. And so if I delete this crummy line, we don't want that one anymore, and I drag this back over, bam! I now have the angle reflect of the wing cut out here. So now when I put on this nose piece, it will fit perfectly up into this section. Oh, the paper gets removed from this, by the way, so it bends. So I put this on, it sits up in there, and the wing buds up perfectly. Pretty cool. You'll do the same thing for the trailing edge. Whoops. On this one. So again, you'll draw the line, you flip it, you reverse it, you'll slam it over, and you'll end up with the same thing. You'll end up with a cutout for the wing. Alright, that's it, guys, for this video. This is there's a lot of pieces in this one. I hope you guys are able to follow along and it's helpful for you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I would be glad to help you out. But this should get you on your way to having the fuselage ready to print and cut. I mean, realistically, guys, you could print the wing, you could print the fuselage right now, and it would work. With very small adjustments, you would be on your way to a beautiful design. Thanks, guys, for watching. We'll see you next time.